Marcus Pearce will tell us about predictive and perceptual processing of music.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Harris and Kai for inviting me. I'm going to preface this talk by saying I'm not a Timbre researcher. Ooh! So adjust your expectations accordingly. But I've become interested in Timbre through the research that I've been doing. So what I'm going to do is tell you about the research that I have been doing, which is not about Timbre, and then that'll help you understand why I've become interested in Timbre. Then I'm going to be talking to you about the research that I've been doing, the literature-based research I've been doing. So the studies I've been looking at to see about the role that Timbre might play in my work. So I'm interested in musical styles, and my starting point is Maya, who's come up, and I'll return to Stephen's point later. So Maya talks about musical styles as psychological and cultural constraints on compositional decisions that composers make. She talks about three kinds of constraints: laws, which are very universal; rules, which are define cultural styles; and then intracultural strategies that might be used by composers or groups of composers. But for our purposes, we're thinking about the constraints on the structure of music. And he talks a lot about syntax. He's really interested in syntax, and so he's thinking about syntax in these ways. This is my sort of synthesis of what he's talking about, rather than his words specifically. So he's thinking about parameters, which means musical features, that allow segmentation into proportional relationships, i.e. intervals. He's thinking about possible antecedent-consequent relationships and implication and closural states that might generate tension and resolution, for example. He's allowing the possibility that these will allow for the formation of hierarchical representations of structure. In his much earlier work in the 50s, he presented a theory of musical styles as probabilistic constraints that are acquired through listening by listeners. My sort of reading of this is that this happens through incidental exposure primarily. So I think as we become enculturated in a musical culture, we internalize the probabilistic regularities, the constraints that make up the musical culture that we're enculturated in. And then those form the mental representations that we use then to organise our understanding, our perception of new music. This is a quote from my 57 paper. Once a musical style has become part of the habit responses of composers, performers and practice listeners, it may be regarded as a complex system of probabilities. And out of such internalised probability systems arise the expectations upon which musical meaning is built. And that's, in a nutshell, captures the sort of theoretical side of what I've been trying to do with my work. So I've been trying to find empirical evidence for exactly what Maya was proposing in the 50s. So this is a very simple example of what Maya was proposing. We hear a simple melody. If we freeze time at that point, then we have set expectations about what's going to happen next. And Maya's proposing that because of the probabilistic rules that we've internalized through enculturation, those expectations can be characterized as a probability distribution, i.e. there's a likelihood of occurrence of the different particular continuations. I've just given you three here. So a major strand in my work has been trying to implement that process of statistical learning and probabilistic generation of expectation. And I'm going to take you through a series of simple simplifications of the model that I've ended up with, but it should give you an idea of how it works. So if we're interested in enculturation, this is a sort of very simple thing that we could do. We have here, appropriately since we're in Germany, 213 German nursery rhymes, which I happen to have, electronically encoded. And we just do a simple pitch frequency analysis, and that allows us to produce a zeroth order distribution, which would give us a likelihood, or give our hypothetical German child a likelihood of the occurrence of different pitches or pitch classes, scale keys there, in this case, because I've transposed them to C. This is not a very good model because it's entirely independent of contexts. So the hypothetical child's expectations will be the same throughout listening to a piece of music, or any piece of music. So we can do it a little bit better. This is a first order model, so the same corpus, but now the frequency counts are dependent on the preceding tone. So this is a first order model, a bigram model, if you like. And we can produce probability distributions just by tapping these frequencies. We do the same thing for pitch interval, which we know is also important in perception of music, and this is a 0th order interval distribution, and this is a first order interval distribution for the same corpus. So we can look at different representations of pitch structure. We can continue increasing the length of the context, and that's what I've tried to represent here. So at the top you have the 0th order distribution with no context. The first line is the first order distribution, and we can include as much context as possible. You might think this is the best model, and in some senses it is, because it's the most structurally specific context. But this context may not have happened very often in your experience, this particular sequence of pitches. So it's statistically not very powerful, whereas these low-order models are statistically quite powerful. So in computational terms, purely, it makes sense to combine predictions from a model to different order. And this is what the model does, for exactly that reason. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is sort of gives you an idea of the implementation. It's implemented as a suffix tree, but we don't need to go through that in any detail. What is useful to go through, though, is the different components of the model. So there's a long-term model, which is the idea here is that this represents your schematic long-term exposure to music, combined with the predictions of a short-term model, which is built incrementally while the model is listening to a given piece of music. So that picks up on repeated motifs and structure within a piece of music. And the outputs, the probability outputs of those models are combined. And within each of those models, a variety of different representations can be used. And the way this works is that different models are built for those different representations. We know that pitch perception, for example, is multidimensional. So chromatic pitch height is important, but also pitch interval is important, pitch chroma, contour is important. So the model is able to build models of those different representations and then combine them. Okay, so when I wanted to test this model, I looked at existing data on pitch expectations, and this was one of the first things that I came across, an experiment by Glenn Schellenberg. So there are 8 English folk songs, and this was a probe tone study. And here, this really doesn't come out very well, but you're going to have to believe me. So these are the ratings of the listeners from 1 to 7, the average ratings. These are the predictions of the model, and you can sort of see that there's a pretty good fit between the two. I'm not going to play examples of these. I don't think we have time. If we look at continuous responses, expectedness responses, but throughout listening to a piece of music, then again, so the solid line here is the human expectedness of these notes from a study by Manzara et al. And the dotted line, which you can hopefully just about make out, is the model. And again, there's a pretty good fit between the two. So the model is predicting listeners' pitch expectations while listening to melody quite accurately, purely through probabilistic learning. And I've included this slide just to make the point that we can look at more complex musical examples. So this is an analysis of density 21.5 by Pearce from a study that was conducted by Hauke Egemann. And this is the information content of the model. This is actually the group mean, which is not reflected in the analysis that Hauke did. But there's a correspondence, for example, where the information content is high, then the listeners tend to find the music unexpected. So we can look at more complex musical examples too. Now, so where I've got to at the moment, so that was all looking at pitch expectations. The model also seems to account quite well for, to some extent, for emotional experience, so based on the process of tension and resolution. It also predicts recognition memory for artificial tone sequences. And it also accounts very well for similarity perception of melodies that are varying pitch and in rhythm. And so this is letting you on to think about other musical parameters. So rhythm and meter, and we have ongoing work that suggests that the model actually predicts expectations for the timing of notes reasonably well, and also for harmonies. So a study by David Sears on classical cadences suggests that, again, the model is predicting listeners' expectations for tonal closure, in harmonic tonal closure very well. This leads me to think about timbre. The model is accounting for listeners' perception of syntax in several different musical parameters, and timbre seems to be the next place to go. Now, I'm going to go back to Meyer. So Meyer distinguished primary and secondary musical parameters, and you picked up this sounds pejorative. I think he's actually being less pejorative than it sounds. I think what he means is that the secondary parameters are not secondary in a sort of negative sense. They're secondary with respect to syntax, which is the thing that he's interested in. That's my interpretation. And he also he does note that the parameters which is syntactic in one style may not be in another. So although he talks about timbre as being a secondary parameter, I think he allows the possibility that it might be a primary parameter in other musical styles. Although not in the actual examples that he focuses on. So this is a. I'm just going to read out this quote from his book. Dynamics may become louder or softer, tempi may be faster or slower, sonorities thicker or thinner, timbres brighter or duller. But because they cannot be segmented into perceptually proportional relationships, there are no specific closural states for such secondary parameters. It is then the presence of syntactic constraints that distinguishes primary from secondary parameters. So he talks about timbre being a secondary parameter in that sense. But I think he does sort of allow that it might be, at least my interpretation is it's possible it could be a primary parameter in some musical styles. So the second part of the presentation, I'm going to look at these two questions. So timbre might play a role as a secondary parameter affecting syntax of primary, the syntactic structure of primary musical parameters. And I think you've already seen some examples of that, but it also might be a primary musical parameter in itself, in Meyer's sense. So we'll go through those two in turn. I'm going to go through the first one quite quickly. This is Meyer's example from Haydn's Military Symphony. So the change in orchestration in bar 178 then delays the point of cadential arrival to a couple of bars later. That's his example of how timbre can have an impact on harmonic progression as a primary musical parameter that's carrying the syntactic structure of the music. This was another example, so a study by Ladel and Durola from last year. They looked at the emotional expressivity of single chords. So this is vertical aspects of harmony, and found that, so they compared piano and violin, found that there were differences in some cases. So the strings invoked high ratings of nostalgia and melancholy, and piano invoked high ratings of happiness and joy. So if those things are happening with vertical aspects of harmony, they probably will have an impact on horizontal aspects of harmony, i.e. harmonic movement, the syntax of harmonic movement. Although, to my knowledge, I haven't found any research that's empirically studied this. This is a study by Pearce and McAdams. They looked at perceived degree of completion at various points during these two pieces in orchestral versions and piano reductions, and found that the orchestral version, where differences existed, was always more relaxed than the piano version, possibly due to greater roughness resulting from the greater fusion of piano reductions. Okay, so timbre as a primary parameter, we've already, I think the two obvious styles, at least in Western musical culture, are Klangfarbe or melody and electroacoustic music, which we've already discussed. We're also very familiar with this timbre space of McAdams et al. And I think that this is the first study that sort of speaks to this question of statistical learning of timbral structure. So it's a statistical learning study I don't have time to go through it. It's actually relatively complex. So I don't have time to go through it in too much detail. But thank you. There are triplets of timbres which are so constructed that when you chain them together randomly, the transition probabilities, like the first order probabilities, are greater within triplets than between them. So the idea is that the statistics of these isochronous timbre sequences creates words of 3 timbres. And as I said, the transition probabilities within those words are greater than between them. So you can segment those words purely based on statistics, i.e. where your expectations are confounded, where there's a low probability transition, that indicates a boundary. So they present sequences of these timbres to people and then test them with the 2 alternative forced choice paradigms. So you have a word and a non-word, and you have to say which is most familiar. And people can do this better than chance. So you see that actually. So you can see that here. So the other thing that they did, which was an interesting part of this study, to 2 interesting other points. So first they had a control condition. So this group wasn't given any pre-exposures. They weren't given any training. So we wouldn't expect these people to have learnt about the probabilistic structure of the stimuli, but they also had they varied the timbral similarity between and within words, such that it was either consistent with the statistical structure, which is here, such that it was inconsistent, which is here, and here it's neutral, i.e. the timbral similarity between and within words is the same here. And what we find is that in this case there's people are able to do this task, so there's learning of these timbral sequences compared to this group who had no training or at chance. And there's even more learning, there's even better performance here, suggesting that these kind of things stack up additively. But one of the things that I think is fundamental to Meyer's notion of primary parameters is the notion of an interval. And there are 3 studies, I think, that bear on this question that I found in the literature, at least so far. And I'm probably not going to have time to go through them in very much detail. But the first is this study of Stevens, where you have a timbral interval in, this is actually Krumm-Hansel's timbral space, if I'm not mistaken, and then another timbral interval, and you have to say, you have to choose the interval that is the best match, and it can be C to D. So this is obviously, in theory, this is the best match. To D3, you've got D4 here and D2. So these candidates, they vary both in they can either be incorrect in terms of direction and also in terms of distance. And these were the results. I've got these here. And in general, so that this D1 tended to be preferred over other positions, except in a couple of cases. So I won't go through this in too much detail, but there's some evidence that listeners can form the notion of a timbral interval. Another study by Krumm-Hansel and Iverson. I'm kind of going to skip through this, but what they paired pitch and timbre, which wasn't done in the Academy study, and they found that the timbral, the upshot of this was that timbral relations, sequential timbral relations, can be perceived, but only when pitch is held constant. So there are constraints on it. This is another study by McDermott and Oxenham, where listeners recognise familiar melodies when presented in terms of brightness intervals and brightness contour, in fact. And in a subsequent study, they found that when expressed in terms of J and Ds, interval discrimination was actually worse for pitch than for brightness, which is surprising. So that they suggest that actually, because the J and Ds themselves are a much larger proportion of the range of brightness that's usually used, that's why intervals aren't they're not used so much. Timbral intervals aren't used or usable so much as pitch and Okay, so that leaves us with a very quick summary if I have time. So listeners can learn statistical dependencies and sequences of timbres. They can perceive timbral intervals to some extent under some conditions. So this was so there are no specificities. This was something that came out of the first study that I didn't really have time to go through. If pitch is constant, that comes out of the Krimhatz-Leibson study, and if timbral intervals are sufficiently large, which comes out of the Dermot study. But the question then is, can listeners learn statistical dependencies in the sequence of timbral intervals? And I don't think this has been studied, i.e. statistical learning study of timbral intervals rather than timbres themselves. And I think that would be the sort of the starting point, or the next point in an investigation of learning timbral syntax. One thing I'll just say, I think because people, my impression is, having not actually run any of these studies, people find these tasks very difficult. Is that right? Yeah. So, and that's probably because musical styles, at least the musical styles that most people are familiar with, don't tend to use timbral intervals as syntactic parameters. So I think using statistical learning as a paradigm for studying this is going to be useful. So can listeners become enculturated in an artificial musical style where timbre actually is a syntactic parameter? Are they able to learn timbral structure as a syntactic parameter? So that's really my proposal for where we go from here. Thank you for listening.
I don't know if you just looked at, there's a recent paper coming out of the group of Annie Patel in the US, looking at song memory in songbirds, so not humans, right? And their question was whether, in humans we have this universal property to be able to transpose melodies, to recognize them across the register. And they were trying to look whether songbirds could do it. And they found out that they could to some extent, but this wasn't driven by pitch, it was driven by timbre. And they had a very interesting series. This paper came out in PNAS maybe 6 months ago. And they had a very nice series of experiments to control for that, and finding out that they can actually learn the syntax of a song through the timbre changes between the different notes rather than the pitch. So maybe your hypothesis is correct, maybe not for humans, I don't know, but it seems to be correct for some species, so maybe you may want to look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. So regarding the search for timbral syntax, I mean, it's a fascinating question. But I'm wondering whether it's kind of the time scale of the ordinary note-to-note transition deceives us a little bit in the realm of timbre. Since, for example, in popular music, we have really timbral cliches, which don't happen on a note-to-note basis, but on sectional levels, for example. You have the refrain in the chorus, where you have your distorted guitar, right? And that's really the timbral cliche, and in some sense, timbral regularity that's subjects have learned probabilistically. So I'm wondering whether in this search we just have to find the real the proper time scale, and then also the proper instruments. For example, with drums, it's pretty clear, right, that there are pretty regulated transitions, even there on a note-to-note basis, right? And even kind of beyond this, one step beyond this, I'm wondering whether it might be possible to extend your model to something that's not based on transitions and probabilistic structures, but on the basis of salient events, for example. Because, for example, the work by Trevor shows that we are quickly able to learn really minute detail, acoustic details. So whenever we have some sort of salient acoustic event, which may have very salient timbres, how may that shape our impression of the whole musical form? So it's kind of a vague question, but
But
I'm wondering whether this might be kind of a valuable timbral extension to your model that's not based on kind of this the model that you use right now, which is based on kind of different timescales, more on salient single event based.
So there are, I think there are two parts to that question. The first one is, yeah, I think you're right. I think timescale is important, and I actually have a slide talking about timescales, but I took it out because I didn't have time to talk about it. So I think you're right. So sometimes the larger timescale is important. In pop music is a good example, but I think textual changes or changes of orchestration in romantic music is also a good example. But also I think on the smaller timescales as well. So regularities at the sort of sub-note level, that might also be interesting to look at. The question I would have is whether the structure at those timescales is strictly syntactic in Meyer's terms. And I'm not 100% sure it is, but I mean, I'm not 100% sure it's not either. But my feeling is that it probably isn't in most cases. But more generally, your point about timescales is a good one, and I think so. I think there are two ways that the timbre can be incorporated as a more as a secondary parameter, and I don't like that term now because I have a kind of pejorative connotation with it, but maybe we should think about a non-syntactic parameter. How about that? The first is, yes, so salience, I think it is a good one. So then notes can be transformed to a kind of higher levels. And I think that's what is that what you're saying? So timbre can kind of emphasize particular notes, and then that can through salience, then the kind of statistical learning process can operate at higher levels. And that's definitely, I think, a promising way to go. Not just through timbral emphasis, but through other kinds of emphasis too. But also, timbre might be like a kind of game that applies to a sequence that implies closure. Might then the degree to which it implies closure can be adjusted by the orchestration. And those are two sort of different mechanisms.
There's a great example of that is Steve Cannon, who's at the University of Saskatchewan, has been looking at the role of instrumentation changes at the recapitulation in a sonata-form symphony movement, and finding that the way the instrumentation is done can actually determine whether the recapitulation is perceived as its arrival at the end of the development section, or it's a relaunching of the so the timbre is playing a role there. And so that raises it playing a role structurally, like you're talking about in the refrain. And is structure part of syntax, or are we conceiving that as something different?
Yeah, well, so in Meyer's terms, it isn't, is it? But I think I'm kind of more open to. Yeah, so I think syntax implies a set of rules that determine the dependency relations between events, and I think it's hard to think about timbre in those terms in most music. But obviously, timbre has an impact on segmentation form more generally, which then I think interacts with syntactic influences on form, like closure being the obvious one. I think we could have a long discussion about that.
Do you want to start setting up, and we'll just take the last question?
It's more comment than questions, because we had some data of string segregation in Alsace. We had asked people to segregate different melodies of interleaved notes, and we changed the tempo of every other note on different parameters. And one of them was, for example, the attack time. And we've done that with musicians and non-musicians. And we look at the threshold where people start to segregate these two melodies. It was quite different between musicians and non-musicians. And we thought, maybe this threshold is related to the statistics of musical notes. So we'll use some data from Patel in this paper when you compare French and English music, where he had, we could find what is the average temporal differences between two sequential notes in English music. And this ratio was spot on so the ratio that we found that people started to segregate 2 notes for musicians. But for non-musicians, this ratio was spot on with the ratio that you can find between 2 phonemes. So we speculate that for musicians, they learn this statistic that you talked about in order to know if 2 notes are fused. But for non-musicians, maybe a bit more based into speech signals.
Very interesting. I'll have to get that paper from you.
Thank you very much, Marcus.